My name is Rachel Morgan, and I never imagined that my own sister would try to destroy the one good thing in my life. She whispered behind my back, told lies straight to my boyfriend's face, and painted me as someone unworthy of love. She thought no one would ever find out. But then, a single recording, one careless slip shattered the entire web of deceit she had spun, and everything changed. This is the story of how I nearly lost the man I loved because of my sister's jealousy, and how the truth finally set me free. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It all began in a small town outside of Denver, Colorado, where I was born and raised. I was 26 years old, working as a graphic designer for a mid-sized firm downtown. My life wasn't perfect, but it was steady, predictable, and, to me, fulfilling. I had just started dating Michael Turner, a 30-year-old firefighter who had quickly become the light in my days. He was kind, grounded, and had this way of making me feel safe, even when the world outside was chaotic. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't boastful, he was just a good man with a good heart, and that was enough for me. But apparently, it wasn't enough for my sister. Samantha Morgan, 3 years my senior, had always been the golden child in our family. Tall, blonde, and with a razor-sharp tongue, she had a way of commanding attention without even trying. Growing up, she was the star cheerleader, the girl who dated the quarterback, the one teachers remembered long after she left school. I was quieter, the one who preferred sketching in notebooks rather than basking in the spotlight. That dynamic carried into adulthood, though by then Samantha's glow had dimmed. She'd bounced from job to job, relationship to relationship, and was living back at home with our parents after her most recent breakup. When Michael and I started seeing each other seriously, I was hesitant to introduce him to my family right away. I knew how Samantha could be, charming to a fault, but quick to cut others down if she felt threatened. Still, Michael was insistent that he wanted to meet the people who mattered to me. Against my better judgment, I invited him over for dinner one Sunday evening at my parents' house. That night should have been a milestone, a warm memory of family and laughter, but instead it became the spark that lit the fire of destruction. From the moment Michael walked through the door, Samantha's eyes locked onto him in a way that made me uneasy. It wasn't admiration, it was assessment, calculation. She laughed a little too loudly at his jokes, asked him pointed questions about his career, and made subtle remarks about how girls in this town don't know how to appreciate a man like him. I brushed it off as her being dramatic, but the knot in my stomach told me otherwise. Over the next few weeks, things started to shift in my relationship. Michael became distant at odd times, distracted during our conversations. I would catch him looking at me with an expression I couldn't read, something like doubt or hesitation. When I asked him about it, he brushed it off, claiming stress at work or fatigue from his long shifts at the firehouse. I wanted to believe him, but I knew something was wrong. The breaking point came one Thursday evening when Michael canceled our dinner plans last minute. His voice over the phone was strained, almost guilty. "Rachel, I think we need to talk." My heart sank instantly. I spent the entire night pacing my apartment, wondering what I had done wrong. What could possibly make him sound so unsure? When he finally came over, his words cut me like glass. "Your sister," he started, hesitant. "She's been telling me some things. Things about you. I didn't want to believe them, but..." His voice trailed off, leaving me frozen on the couch. I felt like the floor had dropped out from beneath me. My sister! What could she possibly have told him? Michael wouldn't look me in the eye. He mentioned that Samantha had pulled him aside after dinner, saying she needed to be honest about me. She told him I was manipulative, that I had a history of sabotaging relationships, and that I didn't actually love him. I just wanted the stability of dating a firefighter. She even claimed I had cheated on past boyfriends, twisting fragments of truth into damning accusations. I sat there, speechless, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear my own voice when I finally whispered, "And you believe her?" Michael ran a hand over his face, torn. "I don't know what to believe. She was so convincing. She said she was trying to protect me." Protect him. That was Samantha's word for it, as if tearing apart my happiness was some noble mission. I wanted to scream, to deny everything, but I knew words alone wouldn't change what had been planted in Michael's mind. Seeds of doubt had a way of growing fast, especially when watered by someone as persuasive as my sister. That night, after Michael left, I sat alone in my apartment, shaking with anger and heartbreak. My own sister, my own blood, had deliberately poisoned the most important relationship in my life. And for what? Jealousy? Spite? Some twisted need to assert control? I didn't know yet. All I knew was that the trust between Michael and me was crumbling, and unless I found a way to expose the truth, I was going to lose him. What I didn't realize then was that Samantha's arrogance would become her undoing. She thought her words would vanish into the air, untraceable, but people like her always slip eventually. And when she did, when that recording surfaced, it would change everything. The days after Michael's confession were some of the hardest I'd endured in a long time. Every interaction between us felt tinged with suspicion, like there was an invisible third person in the room, Samantha's voice echoing in his mind, distorting everything I said. I would reach for his hand and feel him hesitate before holding mine. I would tell him about my day and notice how his eyes scanned my face as if searching for hidden lies. I had never felt so powerless in my own relationship, as though I was standing trial without knowing the charges. I tried to confront Samantha directly, but she was masterful at evasion. When I drove to my parents' house that Saturday morning, she was in the kitchen, sipping coffee like nothing had happened. "Morning, sis," she said, her voice sugary sweet, as if we were still children sharing cereal at the counter. My jaw clenched as I asked her why she had spoken to Michael behind my back. Her response was dripping with false innocence. "Oh, Rachel, I didn't mean anything bad. I just care about him. He's a great guy, and I don't want to see him get hurt. You can be, well, impulsive sometimes. You know that." Impulsive. That was her word of choice, a polished way of framing me as reckless, unreliable. I could feel my blood boiling as she spoke, but I forced myself not to explode. I needed answers. "What exactly did you tell him?" I asked. She tilted her head, pretending to search her memory. "Just the truth. That you've had trouble committing in the past, that you sometimes use people without realizing it, that you don't always think things through." She sipped her coffee again, calm as a snake coiling in the sun. "He deserves to know what he's getting into." The gall of it left me speechless. Yes, I'd had relationships that didn't work out before Michael. Who hadn't? But Samantha had twisted my past, taking ordinary heartbreaks and failures and turning them into ammunition. Worse still, she delivered it to the man I loved, framing herself as some kind of guardian. I wanted to shout at her, to demand she stop interfering, but part of me knew it would be useless. Samantha thrived on conflict. If I gave her an outburst, she would only spin it as further proof of my instability. So I left my parents' house in silence. But inside, I was unraveling. Over the following weeks, the situation deteriorated. Michael and I continued to see each other, but the warmth between us was fading. His calls became shorter, his visits less frequent. When he did come by, he seemed distracted, like a man wrestling with the decision he couldn't bring himself to voice. I lived in fear that every moment together might be the last, that he would walk away not because of who I was, but because of the poison my sister had poured into his ear. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. To make matters worse, Samantha began inserting herself into our lives more often. She would accidentally show up at the same restaurants we went to, breezing over to our table with a bright smile and casual conversation. She added Michael on social media, commenting on his posts with inside jokes that made it look like they were closer than they were. Once I even caught her leaving him a gift at the fire station, claiming it was just a token of appreciation for his service. I felt trapped in a nightmare where the person supposed to be my ally, my sister, was actively undermining me. And it wasn't just about Michael. It was about the way she made me feel invisible, the way she always had. Growing up, Samantha had a knack for making
everything a competition. If I got an A on a project, she would find a way to one-up me with an award. If I had a crush, she would flirt with him just to see if she could take his attention. And every time I would swallow my hurt, convincing myself it was just sibling rivalry. But this was different. This was malicious. I started to question myself, which is exactly what she wanted. Was I really unworthy of Michael? Was I fooling myself thinking I could hold on to him? Her voice burrowed into my thoughts even when she wasn't there, repeating like a cruel mantra, "He's too good for you. He deserves better."
And yet, I couldn't bring myself to tell Michael the full extent of what Samantha was doing. I feared it would sound like pettiness, like I was asking him to choose between us. The irony was bitter. She was planting seeds of doubt in his mind about me, while I was too afraid to expose her lies in case it made me look desperate. It was a vicious cycle, one that left me isolated and ashamed. The hidden problem wasn't just Samantha's jealousy. It was deeper than that. It was the years of silence that had trained me to endure her cruelty without fighting back. It was the family dynamic that always placed her on a pedestal while I learned to keep my head down. It was my own unwillingness to believe that someone so close to me could truly want to see me fail. But the more I stayed quiet, the stronger her hold became. Samantha had woven herself into my relationship like a shadow, always there, always whispering doubts. And as much as I tried to pretend otherwise, I knew I was running out of time. If something didn't change soon, I would lose Michael for good. What I didn't know then was that fate was about to step in. Because Samantha's schemes, no matter how carefully crafted, weren't flawless. She believed she could manipulate endlessly without consequence. But people who thrive on lies always forget one thing. The truth has a way of revealing itself. And for Samantha, her downfall would come not from me, but from her own careless tongue. The tension between Michael and me simmered like a pot just waiting to boil over, and by the middle of March, I could feel the cracks widening with every passing day. At first, I told myself it was just a rough patch, something every couple went through, but deep down, I knew this was different. There was something corrosive eating away at us from within, something I couldn't repair with date nights, reassurances, or hopeful smiles. That something I knew was Samantha. The breaking point came on a Friday evening after one of Michael's 24-hour shifts at the firehouse. I had prepared dinner for him at my apartment, determined to rekindle even a flicker of the closeness we once shared. I lit candles, set the table with his favorite meal, grilled salmon with roasted potatoes, and even baked a pie, which I rarely did. I wanted him to feel appreciated, to feel like this relationship was worth fighting for. But when he arrived, though, his expression was guarded. He hugged me, but it was the kind of hug you give out of obligation, not warmth. He barely touched his food, picking at it while staring down at his plate. Finally, after an unbearably long silence, he looked up at me with eyes heavy with conflict. "Rachel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." My stomach nodded instantly. "Of course," I said, trying to sound calm, though my pulse was racing. He swallowed hard. "Did you cheat on your ex, Daniel?" The air left my lungs in one sharp exhale, and I nearly dropped my fork. Of all the lies Samantha could have told, she had chosen the ugliest, the one that cut deepest. Daniel had been my boyfriend during college, a relationship that ended painfully, but not because of betrayal. He was the one who drifted away, lost in his ambitions, and eventually admitted he didn't see a future for us. It had been hard, but it was clean. I had never once been unfaithful to him or to anyone else. "No," I said firmly, my voice trembling with both anger and hurt. "Where did you even hear that?" Michael leaned back, his jaw tight. "Samantha told me.
She said she didn't want me to find out later and feel blindsided. She swore she saw you sneaking around back then. For a moment, I couldn't even process the words. Sneaking around? Samantha hadn't even known Daniel that well. The audacity of her fabricating such a specific, damning lie left me reeling. "That's not true," I said, my voice sharper now. "She's lying. She's making things up because she doesn't want us together. Michael, please, you know me better than that." But his silence told me he wasn't sure. That was the knife in the wound. Not just that Samantha lied, but that Michael, the man who had looked into my eyes countless times and told me he trusted me with his life, couldn't brush it aside as nonsense. I stood from the table, my appetite gone, tears burning my eyes. "Do you seriously think I would do that to you? Do you honestly believe I'm that kind of person?" Michael rubbed the back of his neck, clearly torn. "I don't know what to think anymore, Rachel. Your sister makes it sound so convincing, and I don't know. Maybe I'm a fool for not seeing it sooner." The weight of his words crushed me. It was one thing for Samantha to cast doubts, but another entirely for Michael to let those doubts take root. In that moment, I felt like I had already lost him, like all the love and trust we had built was slipping away.
I knew then that this couldn't continue. I couldn't keep pretending that Samantha's interference was just an annoyance I could ignore. It was destroying me, tearing apart the relationship I had fought so hard to build. For years, I had endured her cruelty in silence, telling myself it wasn't worth the fight. But this was too far. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house again, this time with fire in my chest. I found Samantha in the living room, scrolling through her phone, looking as smug as ever. She barely glanced up when I stormed in. "Why are you lying to Michael?" I demanded, my voice trembling with fury. She smirked, setting her phone aside. "Lying? I'm not lying. I'm protecting him. You can't expect everyone to ignore your history." "What history?" I snapped. "You're making things up. You weren't even around enough to know what happened with Daniel." She shrugged, unbothered. "People talk. And besides, maybe I exaggerated. But you can't deny you have a pattern, Rachel. Men come and go, and it's always messy. Michael deserves better than to end up another one of your disasters." Her words hit me like bullets, not because they were true, but because of how coldly she delivered them. She genuinely believed, or wanted to believe, that I was incapable of love, that I was destined to fail. I realized then that this wasn't about Michael at all. It was about Samantha's need to control the narrative of my life. As long as I was happy, as long as I had something she didn't, she couldn't stand it. That was my breaking point. I couldn't keep waiting for her lies to pile up until everything crumbled. I had to do something. For the first time in my life, I decided I wasn't going to sit quietly while Samantha dictated my worth. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to fight back. And what I couldn't have known at the time was that Samantha's own arrogance was about to hand me the weapon I needed. Because in her obsession with tearing me down, she had left behind a trail she couldn't erase. And soon, that trail would lead to the recording that would expose everything. The weekend after that confrontation with Samantha, I tried to focus on anything other than the turmoil brewing in my life. But it was impossible. Even at work, sitting in front of my computer screen designing layouts for clients, my mind wandered back to Michael's doubtful eyes, Samantha's smug expression, and the gnawing fear that I was already losing the man I loved. But as much as I felt alone in the battle, cracks were beginning to show in Samantha's performance, and others were starting to notice. It began with my best friend, Claire Reynolds, someone who had known me since high school. Claire was fiery, outspoken, and had little patience for drama. We met for coffee at our usual spot downtown, a small cafe with brick walls and mismatched chairs that always smelled like cinnamon and espresso. I hadn't told her the full extent of what was happening, but she could read me like a book. "You look like you haven't slept in days," she said, stirring her latte. "What's going on?" I sighed, staring into my cup. "It's Samantha. She's interfering. She's been telling Michael things about me, lies, and now he doesn't know what to believe."
Claire's eyes narrowed. That woman has always had it out for you. What exactly did she say? I hesitated, then repeated the accusation about Daniel, how Samantha had twisted the past to make me look like a cheater. Claire slammed her hand against the table, rattling our mugs. Unbelievable. She's projecting her own mess onto you. Everyone knows she's the one who's cheated on half the guys she's dated, not you. Her words cut through my despair like a beam of light. She was right. Samantha had always been reckless in her relationships, moving from one man to another, leaving chaos in her wake. Yet here she was, painting me as the unfaithful one. Claire leaned forward, her voice firm. Rachel, you can't let her keep doing this. Michael needs to hear the truth from more than just you. He needs perspective. Let me talk to him. At first I was hesitant. It felt childish to bring in reinforcements, like we were in middle school squabbles instead of dealing with adult lives and relationships. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Samantha had been winning precisely because she operated in the shadows. She whispered lies to Michael when I wasn't around, counted on my silence, and thrived on secrecy. If the truth was going to stand a chance, it had to be louder. The opportunity came sooner than expected. The following week, Michael and I attended a community fundraiser for the fire department. It was a big event, held in the local park with food trucks, live music, and dozens of families milling about. Samantha, of course, made an appearance, dressed in a sundress too elegant for the occasion, basking in the attention of men who had no idea who they were dealing with. I stuck close to Michael, though I could feel the tension between us like static electricity. When Claire arrived with her husband, she wasted no time. She greeted Michael warmly and pulled him aside while I nervously lingered nearby, pretending to browse raffle baskets.
I watched them from a distance, my heart pounding. Claire spoke with her usual conviction, gesturing animatedly while Michael listened, his arms crossed. Though I couldn't hear the words, I knew she was telling him the truth, that Samantha had a history of manipulation, that she thrived on undermining me, that I had never been unfaithful. At first, Michael's expression was guarded, but slowly his brow furrowed and he glanced over at Samantha, who was laughing too loudly with a group of men by the lemonade stand. When the conversation ended, Michael rejoined me, quieter than usual, but different somehow. His eyes weren't filled with the same doubt I had seen days before. He didn't say much, just slipped his hand into mine, but the gesture felt meaningful, as though a thread of trust was weaving its way back into place. That night, as we left the fundraiser, he finally spoke. Claire said some things. About your sister. About her patterns. His voice was careful, as if testing the words. I don't know what to make of it yet, but it doesn't line up with the way Samantha's been presenting herself. Relief flooded me, though I kept my voice calm. Because she's lying, Michael. That's what she does. She twists things until people doubt themselves. It's always been that way. He was quiet for a long time before nodding slowly. Maybe I've been too quick to take her at her word. It wasn't a full victory, but it was something. A shift. For the first time, Michael wasn't blindly swallowing Samantha's stories. And once that seed of doubt was planted about her, I knew it would only grow. Because Samantha couldn't help herself. She always pushed too far. And push she did. Over the following days, she became bolder, more reckless. She started calling Michael directly under the guise of checking in. She left long voicemails about how she worried for him, how I was unstable and prone to jealousy. Once, she even texted him late at night, saying she hoped he wasn't falling for Rachel's act. Michael showed me one of the messages, his lips pressed in a thin line. This doesn't feel right, he admitted. No, it wasn't right. It was harassment disguised as concern. And the more she meddled, the more Michael's patience wore thin. He began to see what I had known all along. Samantha wasn't protecting him. She was poisoning him against me for her own satisfaction. Still, I knew words and suspicions alone weren't enough. Samantha was clever, always careful not to expose herself fully. But arrogance makes people sloppy, and soon she would slip. And when she did, Michael wouldn't just suspect, he would know.
What neither of us realized then was that someone else had already caught Samantha's duplicity in action. Not me, not Michael, but a friend who happened to overhear a conversation she thought was private. That overheard moment, innocuous at first, would become the beginning of the end of her lies. After the fundraiser, things between Michael and me felt fragile but cautiously hopeful. The tension hadn't fully dissipated, and I knew Samantha wasn't going to give up quietly. Her manipulations had become a constant undercurrent in our lives, and if I wanted to protect my relationship, I needed more than Claire's reassurance or Michael's growing doubts. I needed proof, something concrete that could expose Samantha for what she really was. The first breakthrough came unexpectedly, one ordinary Wednesday evening. I was at home working on a freelance project, headphones on, sketching out a client's new logo when my phone buzzed. It was Emma, one of my colleagues, and also happens to be close friends with Claire. She sounded breathless over the phone. "Rachel, you're not going to believe this," she said, her voice urgent. "I overheard Samantha on the phone. She's talking about you, Michael, everything. She didn't know anyone else could hear her." My heart leapt. "Wait, what do you mean overheard?" I asked, trying to calm the sudden rush of adrenaline. Emma explained that she had been at a cafe across the street from my parents' house, finishing some work when Samantha stepped outside to take a call. She didn't use a headset, didn't cover her voice, and didn't know that Emma's table had a clear line of sight and sound. For nearly 15 minutes, Samantha ranted and plotted, describing in exact detail how she had been protecting Michael from me by planting doubts, fabricating stories about my past relationships, and even coaching him to question my trustworthiness. "That's insane," I whispered, clutching my mug so tightly my knuckles ached. Emma paused, then continued. "She mentioned a recording she thought you'd never find. She was practicing how to manipulate him over the phone, even joking about how easy it was to twist the truth. Rachel, this is gold. You need to hear it." I didn't need more convincing. That night, I drove to Emma's apartment, my mind racing with a mix of fear and determination. When she played the recording, Samantha's voice filled the room, her smug tone dripping with self-assuredness. Every word was like a dagger to my chest. She mocked my supposed history of drama, laughed about how Michael was too good to fall for me blindly, and detailed the lies she had told him. It was irrefutable. It was everything we needed to prove that she had been deliberately trying to sabotage our relationship.
Holding that phone in my hand, I felt a surge of empowerment I hadn't experienced in months. Here was tangible proof. Not hearsay, not speculation, but a recording in her own voice. Samantha had left a trail, and it was wide enough for anyone to see. I knew that confronting her directly was risky. She was volatile and cunning. But with this recording, I had leverage. The next step was deciding what to do with it. I couldn't just play it to Michael outright. After all, hearing that his girlfriend's sister had been systematically lying to him would be a shock, and I needed to present it in a way that didn't make me seem like the instigator. I wanted Michael to see Samantha for what she was, not me. So I began documenting everything. I saved text messages, took screenshots of the late-night warnings she sent him, and compiled notes about her behaviors and patterns. For days, I worked methodically, building a dossier that left no room for doubt. I recorded the dates of her calls, the contents of the conversations Emma had overheard, and even noted times she had shown up uninvited at places Michael and I frequented. I know that when it came time to confront her, this evidence would speak louder than my words. Meanwhile, Samantha continued her antics, unaware that her web was unraveling. She sent Michael another text, claiming she was only looking out for him, and I watched him pause, read it, and then put the phone down, frustration written all over his face. It was clear that the seeds of doubt I had feared were starting to wither. He was beginning to question her motives. One night, as I was reviewing my notes and listening to the recording again, I realized the scope of what Samantha had done. She hadn't just interfered casually, she had strategically inserted herself into every interaction,
every choice, every moment of doubt. Her manipulation was precise, calculated, and cruel. And yet, because of her carelessness in leaving this recording, she had provided the key to dismantling her own lies. The turning point in my thinking came when I spoke to Claire again. We sat on her balcony late at night, the city lights twinkling below. "Rachel," she said, gripping my hand, "you have everything you need to bring this to light. You just have to do it carefully. Don't let her spin it as drama or jealousy. Make it about the truth. Show Michael the real her, not the mask she wants him to see." Her words gave me clarity. I realized that Samantha thrived on control, and the only way to strip that control away was with evidence that couldn't be refuted. I didn't need to argue, I didn't need to beg for belief, her own voice would do it for me. The plan formed slowly, carefully. I would present the recording and the documentation to Michael at a time when he was calm, open, and ready to truly listen. I would let him process it in his own way, see the pattern, and then make his own decision. I would let the truth stand on its own, unembellished by emotion or speculation. By the end of that week, I felt a cautious sense of readiness I hadn't felt in months. For the first time since Samantha's interference began, I wasn't just reacting, I was preparing to act. The evidence was in my hands, and with it came the knowledge that the tide was turning. Samantha's grip was slipping, and the next chapter in the story would be the one where the truth finally started to fight back. The weekend arrived with a tension that was almost unbearable. Michael had been distant but thoughtful over the past few days, clearly wrestling with his feelings and the creeping doubts about Samantha's intentions. I decided it was time. There could be no more waiting, no more tiptoeing around her manipulations. I needed him to see the truth, the full scope of what had been happening, and I had the recording and documentation to do it. The hard part was choosing the right moment when emotions wouldn't cloud judgment and clarity could prevail. Saturday evening, Michael stopped by my apartment after his shift. He looked weary, his uniform slightly rumpled, and his eyes reflected the weight of weeks of uncertainty. We settled on the couch, the soft hum of the city outside a backdrop to the storm of our emotions. I took a deep breath, hands shaking slightly, and said, "Michael, I need you to listen to something. I need you to hear the truth about everything." I handed him my phone. Emma had recorded Samantha's voice on her device, and I had transferred the file to mine. Michael looked puzzled but attentive, curiosity flickering through his features. I watched him as he pressed play, and Samantha's smug, confident voice filled the room. She was describing, with cruel precision, how she had deliberately manipulated him, planting seeds of doubt about my past, questioning my motives, and portraying me as unstable and unworthy. At first, Michael's expression was one of disbelief. His lips parted, his brow furrowed. This can't be real," he whispered, leaning closer. Samantha's voice continued, laughing lightly as she recounted her tactics, the exact phrases she had used to make him doubt me. Every sentence was a confirmation of the lies he had been grappling with, and it hit him like a punch to the chest.
As the recording played, I explained the context, showing him screenshots of her messages, texts she had sent that night, and a timeline of her interference. I could see the shift in him, the slow, dawning realization that what he had been experiencing wasn't a reflection of my character, but a calculated campaign against me. His hands trembled slightly as he scrolled through the evidence, disbelief giving way to anger and hurt. When the recording ended, Michael sat back, silent, processing everything. I waited, holding my breath. "Rachel, I don't know what to say," he murmured finally. His eyes, which had been clouded with doubt, were now sharp with clarity. She was lying. She manipulated me. I can't believe she would do that to us." "I know," I said softly, my throat tight. "I wanted to tell you sooner, but I needed proof. I couldn't just ask you to believe me without evidence. She's clever, Michael. She knows how to make her lies sound convincing." He ran a hand through his hair, still staring at the phone as though it contained some hidden secret he couldn't quite digest. "I feel like an idiot," he admitted. "I should have seen it. I should have realized. But her words, they were convincing. She made me doubt you." I reached for his hand, gripping it gently.
You weren't an idiot, I said firmly. You were human. Anyone could have been deceived. The important thing is that you see the truth now. Michael took a deep breath, nodding slowly. I do, and I'm sorry. I let her get between us. I let her poison my mind. That's over now, I replied. She can't hurt us anymore. Not with you seeing her for who she really is. The relief that washed over me was profound, but I also felt a surge of anger towards Samantha. Her arrogance had been her downfall. She had left a permanent record of her deceit, and that record had exposed her lies in the most undeniable way possible. Michael and I sat together that night, talking through everything, reestablishing trust and slowly rebuilding the intimacy that had been chipped away by Samantha's manipulations. Over the next few days, Michael began reaching out to friends and colleagues who had also noticed Samantha's behavior. He wasn't just reassessing our relationship, he was actively connecting the dots, seeing how her pattern of interference extended beyond just us. It was validating in a way I hadn't anticipated, not only for him, but for me as well. Knowing that someone else could objectively see her tactics and corroborate our experience strengthened my resolve. I realized that the midpoint of this story wasn't just about exposing Samantha, it was about reclaiming my own power. I had been passive for too long, letting her influence the perceptions of others and dictate my sense of self-worth. The undeniable proof in that recording shifted everything. It didn't just convince Michael, it reminded me that I had the right to stand up for myself, to protect the life I had built, and to refuse to be undermined by someone else's jealousy. That realization was liberating, but it also marked a point of no return. Samantha had been unmasked, and there was no going back to pretending everything was normal. Michael and I were on the same side now, aligned against the interference that had threatened to destroy us. And while there was still the challenge of confronting Samantha directly, of ensuring she couldn't sabotage us further, the major revelation, the proof, was in our hands. The next steps would be decisive, and they would determine the fate of our relationship and the consequences Samantha would face. By the end of that week, the pattern was unmistakable. Samantha's lies had crumbled in the face of objective, undeniable evidence. The balance had shifted, and I felt the first real sense of hope I had experienced in months. This wasn't the end of the struggle, but it was the turning point, the moment where truth triumphed over deceit, and where Michael and I could finally begin to rebuild what had been almost lost. Even with the recording and supporting evidence in hand, confronting Samantha was a decision I didn't take lightly. For years, I had endured her manipulations silently, letting her dominate conversations, dictate family dynamics, and undermine my confidence. But now, with Michael fully aware of the truth and firmly by my side, I faced a crossroads. Remain silent and let her continue exerting control over my life, or confront her openly, risk the fallout, and finally reclaim my voice. It was terrifying, yet liberating, and I knew that the choice I made now would set the tone for everything that followed. The decision crystallized one evening as I sat with Michael in my apartment, the recording replaying softly in the background while we went over her messages and our compiled notes. "Rachel," he said, gripping my hand, "you can do this. You've got proof and you're not alone. You can finally tell her that enough is enough." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Part of me wanted to avoid confrontation entirely, to sidestep the inevitable arguments, the accusations, and the guilt trips that Samantha thrived on. But another part, deeper, fiercer, and more determined, knew that silence had only allowed her to flourish. Speaking up wasn't just about protecting my relationship, it was about reclaiming my own dignity.
The confrontation itself had to be carefully orchestrated. I couldn't simply ambush her in anger. That would give her room to deflect, manipulate, and portray me as irrational. Instead, I waited for a moment when our parents weren't home and when I could control the environment. I invited her to my apartment under the pretense of a casual chat, hoping to create a neutral space where I could present the truth clearly, without interruptions or distractions. When Samantha arrived, she was her usual self, smiling, confident, unaware that the tide was about to turn. I gestured for her to sit on the couch, offering tea as a gesture of civility, though my nerves were coiled like springs. "Samantha," I began, my voice steady despite the racing in my chest. "We need to talk about what's been happening with Michael."
Her smile faltered slightly, though she tried to cover it with a dismissive laugh. Oh, Rachel, I'm sure this is about some misunderstanding, right? I shook my head, taking a deep breath. No, it's not a misunderstanding. I know exactly what you've been doing. I know the lies you've told him, the doubts you've planted, the stories you fabricated about my past. And I have proof. Samantha's eyes narrowed, suspicion creeping in. Proof? She asked, cautiously, a slight tremor in her voice betraying her composed facade. I held up my phone and hit play on the recording. Samantha's smug, confident voice filled the room, recounting her manipulations in painstaking detail. She described how she had twisted my past, warned Michael of supposed patterns in my behavior, and even coached him to question my loyalty. She laughed as she spoke, entirely unaware that her own words were being weaponized against her. Her expression shifted dramatically as the reality of what she had done settled in. She opened her mouth, then closed it, as though she couldn't find a way to defend herself. I calmly laid out the rest of the evidence, screenshots of her texts, the timeline of her interventions, and accounts from friends who had noticed her manipulative behavior. For the first time, I saw Samantha as she truly was, not the confident, untouchable sister I had grown up with, but a person caught in her own web of lies. Her mask had slipped, and there was nowhere for her to hide. She tried to deflect, claiming that she had only wanted to protect Michael, but her words were hollow, unconvincing. The documentation and recording left no room for doubt, no opportunity for her to rewrite history or frame herself as a hero. I felt a surge of clarity and empowerment as I spoke, my voice unwavering. Samantha, this ends now. You can't interfere in my relationship anymore. You can't manipulate, lie, or poison someone I love. Your actions have consequences, and Michael deserves to see the truth. She recoiled, but it was too late. The proof had already spoken, and her usual tactics, charm, deception, guilt-tripping, were useless against something so concrete. For the first time in our lives, I wasn't the one shrinking under her influence. I wasn't the passive sister absorbing the damage. I was standing firm, voice raised, evidence in hand, taking a stand that Samantha had never expected. The confrontation lasted for hours, but it wasn't just about anger or blame. It was about setting boundaries, reclaiming control, and making sure that the lies that had almost destroyed my relationship could never take root again. Samantha alternated between denial and defensiveness, but the more she protested, the clearer it became that the recording and documentation had stripped her of power. She had built a house of cards, and it was collapsing right before her eyes. By the end of the evening, she left my apartment in a quiet rage, no words left to challenge the irrefutable evidence I had presented. For the first time, she realized that I could and would stand up for myself, that her manipulations had limits, and that the consequences of her actions were unavoidable. After she left, Michael and I sat together in stunned silence, the weight of what had just happened settling over us. I felt a mix of relief, triumph, and exhaustion. We had survived the most dangerous part of Samantha's interference, the moment where her lies might have been believed without question. And in that moment, I understood the power of speaking the truth decisively, without hesitation, with proof to back it up. It was a turning point, not just for my relationship with Michael, but for my relationship with myself. I realized that I didn't have to live under the shadow of someone else's envy, manipulation, or control. The choice to speak was mine, and with it came a liberation I had never known, a sense of justice, clarity, and the undeniable knowledge that the truth, once revealed, could not be denied. The days following Samantha's exposure were a strange mixture of relief and mounting tension. On one hand, Michael and I had regained a level of trust and understanding that had been eroded by her manipulations, and the knowledge that we had irrefutable proof in our hands provided a sense of security. But on the other hand, Samantha was far from defeated. Her pride, her need for control, and her obsession with dominance over our lives created an undercurrent of tension that could explode at any moment. I knew that confronting her once hadn't fully neutralized her. It had only forced her to recalibrate.
The true confrontation came unexpectedly during a family gathering at our parents' home. Samantha had been trying to maintain her facade, laughing and joking with cousins, blending into the background like nothing had happened. But her eyes were sharper now, scanning the room for opportunities, looking for ways to regain the ground she had lost. She didn't know it yet, but we were prepared, and this time we weren't just defending ourselves, we were taking control. I entered the living room with Michael by my side, our hands brushing together for reassurance. My parents were preoccupied with conversation, oblivious to the tension crackling in the air. Samantha's smile faltered as she noticed us approaching. I didn't hesitate. I stopped a few feet away and looked directly at her, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make her uncomfortable. "Samantha," I said, my voice calm but firm, "we need to talk, here and now." Her initial reaction was a laugh, sharp and dismissive. "Rachel, don't tell me this is about the same old nonsense. I've moved on. You've blown everything out of proportion." I shook my head, refusing to be intimidated. "No, Samantha. You need to understand that your actions have consequences. The lies, the manipulation, the attempts to poison Michael against me, everything has been documented. The recording exists, and it's clear to him and to me that you've been interfering in our lives maliciously." Her expression hardened. "Documented? What are you talking about?" Michael stepped forward, his voice steady but unwavering. "Samantha, it's all here. The messages, the timeline, the recording. Rachel isn't exaggerating. This isn't about jealousy or rivalry. This is about you intentionally sabotaging our relationship." For a moment, Samantha was silent, blinking as though processing something she had never anticipated. The evidence against her. She tried to speak, but her words stumbled. I was just looking out for him," she muttered weakly. "I didn't mean to." I cut her off, holding up my hand. "No, stop. Your intention doesn't erase the impact. You tried to manipulate someone we both care about. You tried to control my life. And now it's exposed. This is real, Samantha, and there's no twisting it." Her face flushed crimson, anger and humiliation warring for dominance. "You can't just... This isn't fair. You're turning everyone against me." Michael's eyes met mine, silent communication passing between us. He nodded ever so slightly, giving me strength. "Samantha," he said, voice calm but resolute, "this isn't about turning anyone against you. It's about acknowledging the truth. You can't hide behind lies anymore. Rachel doesn't deserve this, and neither do I." The room was tense, every eye on us, sensing the gravity of the moment even if they didn't understand all the details. My parents glanced back and forth, confusion and concern clouding their expressions. I realized then that confronting Samantha openly wasn't just about validation for Michael and me. It was about holding her accountable publicly, breaking her control over the narrative she had long manipulated. Samantha's defense faltered, but she wasn't defeated yet. She tried one last maneuver, a familiar mix of anger and theatrics, attempting to shift blame. "You're overreacting. You've always been dramatic, Rachel. Michael, she's making this into a bigger deal than it needs to be." Michael shook his head slowly, his expression unyielding. "No, Samantha, this is exactly the size of the deal it needs to be. Your lies, your interference, it ends now." I felt a mixture of pride and vindication, standing there with Michael, unshaken by her theatrics. We had waited for the right moment, armed with the truth, and nothing she could say or do now would erase the facts. The confrontation was about more than anger. It was about reclaiming agency over our lives. For the first time, Samantha's usual tactics, gaslighting, manipulation, coercion, were powerless. Samantha finally turned away, lips pressed into a thin line, her posture rigid with suppressed fury. It was clear she recognized that her influence had been stripped, and that any further attempts to assert control would only expose her further. The tension in the room slowly dissipated as she retreated to another part of the house, leaving Michael and me standing together, victorious in the quiet but undeniable way that comes when truth confronts deception. As we sat down later that evening, reflecting on what had just transpired,
I realized that confrontation wasn't just about exposing Samantha, it was about taking back my life and my relationship. It was about showing Michael, my family, and myself that deception and manipulation could be met with courage, preparation, and evidence. The pressure Samantha had tried to maintain over us was gone, replaced by clarity and the firm understanding that her power was no longer absolute. The confrontation marked a turning point, a second pinch where the stakes were highest and the antagonist's true nature was fully revealed. Samantha's mask had dropped, her manipulations laid bare, and the weight of her actions had begun to shift the dynamic of our family and relationship forever. We had survived the storm she created, and for the first time, I felt an unwavering sense of control, knowing that the next steps would lead to resolution.
Even after confronting Samantha and exposing her lies, the days that followed were far from peaceful. In theory, Michael and I should have felt liberated, confident that the truth had restored our bond, yet the emotional aftermath was heavier than I had anticipated. Facing Samantha had been empowering, yes, but it had also opened a floodgate of consequences that left me questioning whether speaking out was truly worth the turmoil. There were moments when I wondered if the victory we had achieved was only temporary, if her bitterness and retaliation would return to undo everything we had worked so hard to protect. The tension began subtly at first. Samantha withdrew from direct contact, which, on the surface, seemed like a relief, but her silence carried a weight of its own. She no longer smiled at family gatherings or engaged casually in conversation. Instead, she observed from a distance, her eyes sharp, calculating. I could sense her resentment radiating toward us, a quiet storm waiting for a chance to erupt. Every time Michael and I were together in public or around family, I noticed the way she would linger in the background, her expression tight, a subtle yet constant reminder that the conflict was far from over. At home, I found myself replaying every interaction, every word, every subtle expression Samantha had used to manipulate or intimidate me. Sleep became elusive. At night, I would lie awake, heart pounding, thinking about how clever she had been, how carefully she had orchestrated her campaign to undermine my relationship. Despite all the evidence, the confrontation, and Michael's clear understanding of the truth, I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. It was as if Samantha's influence lingered in the corners of my life, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Michael noticed my unease, of course. He tried to comfort me, but I could see the strain in his eyes as well. He had been blindsided by Samantha's lies, manipulated into questioning me, and although he now knew the truth, the experience had left him wary. Trust was rebuilding, but it wasn't instantaneous. He would sometimes pause mid-conversation, considering whether Samantha might still be trying to insert herself between us. And I, for my part, was hyper-aware of every phone call, every message, every family event, wondering if Samantha would attempt another attack. One particularly difficult evening, after a tense family dinner where Samantha had barely spoken but had given us several pointed glances, I found myself in the living room alone, Michael asleep in the next room. The recording of Samantha's confession sat in my phone, proof that she had lied, manipulated, and schemed. And yet, as I stared at the device, I felt the weight of doubt creeping back in. What if Michael had only temporarily set her aside in his mind? What if her quiet, simmering resentment would one day explode, unraveling the fragile stability we had reclaimed? Tears came unbidden. I realized that exposing Samantha hadn't erased the emotional damage she had inflicted. It hadn't undone the weeks of doubt, the nights of sleepless anxiety, the gnawing feeling that someone I loved and trusted had been influenced by lies. The victory felt hollow at times, overshadowed by the lingering trauma she had caused. I wondered if we had truly won, or if we were merely in a temporary lull before her next attempt at sabotage. Compounding the emotional strain were subtle attacks from others in the family. Some relatives, who had long favored Samantha, questioned whether I had overreacted or misrepresented the situation.
Their whispers, meant to subtly undermine me, struck at the heart of the self-doubt I had been fighting to suppress. I realized that exposing Samantha publicly had consequences beyond just our relationship. It rippled outward, challenging alliances, stirring judgment, and forcing everyone to take sides. In the middle of that week, I confronted a particularly hard truth. Even when the evidence was undeniable, when the recording and documentation were irrefutable, the emotional fallout was still mine to bear. I couldn't control how others perceived the conflict, couldn't erase the anxiety Samantha had seeded in my mind, and couldn't immediately undo the months of manipulation. It was a sobering realization, one that left me feeling small, isolated, and exhausted. Late one night, I sat on my balcony, the city lights below glimmering like distant promises, and whispered to myself, was it worth it? The answer was complicated. I knew I had done the right thing in standing up for myself and Michael, in exposing the lies and manipulation. And yet the immediate cost, the emotional turmoil, the lingering fear, the tension in our family was heavy. I felt the weight of responsibility not just for my own actions, but for the reactions and consequences that followed. But even in that dark, uncertain place, a small spark persisted. Deep down, I knew that truth had power, that courage had weight, and that although Samantha's influence had caused pain, it could not last forever. The emotional storm was intense, the backlash real, but it was temporary. It was the crucible through which Michael and I would emerge stronger, more resilient, and more aligned than ever. The dark night of the soul wasn't an ending, it was the precursor to the final push, the climax where all the pieces would come together, and justice and vindication would finally be undeniable.
And as I sat there, staring into the night, I made a silent promise. I would weather the storm, I would protect what was mine, and I would ensure that the truth, no matter how painful or difficult to assert, would finally prevail. The next Saturday, Michael and I decided it was time to bring everything to a head in a way that left no room for doubt or manipulation. The tension of the past weeks had built to a near unbearable level, and though the recording and documentation had already exposed Samantha, we both knew that indirect confrontations and quiet victories were not enough. For real change, the truth needed to be witnessed publicly, where her deception could be confronted squarely and where everyone involved, family, friends, and Michael, could see the evidence laid bare without any interference. We invited my parents, a few close family friends, and Claire to my apartment under the pretense of a casual dinner, creating a controlled environment where we could finally present the facts. When Samantha arrived, she wore the familiar air of confidence, though I could see faint tremors of unease flicker across her face as she scanned the room and noticed the setup. She wasn't expecting a formal confrontation. Her arrogance had convinced her that she could continue weaving her lies behind closed doors. I welcomed her politely, but firmly, offering her a seat across from me and placing the phone containing the recording on the table. Michael sat beside me, hands clasped tightly together, his presence an anchor of solidarity. I began calmly, speaking to the group as much as I did to Samantha. Everyone here knows how important honesty and trust are in relationships and family. Recently, we've experienced a situation where those values were intentionally undermined, and I feel it's time to bring clarity to what has been happening. Samantha's eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line as she prepared to protest, but I continued. Over the past few months, Samantha has been actively interfering in my relationship with Michael. She's sent messages, planted doubts, and misrepresented my character in order to manipulate his perception of me. And tonight, we have evidence to demonstrate exactly what occurred. I hit play on the recording. Samantha's confident, mocking voice filled the apartment, recounting her strategies, her lies, and her deliberate attempts to poison Michael's trust in me.
She tried to speak over it at first, opening her mouth to interrupt, but the words that had once been tools of manipulation now became chains of accountability, sealing her deception. Michael watched intently, his face shifting through a spectrum of emotions: disbelief, anger, and finally resolute clarity. When the recording ended, I presented the additional evidence: screenshots of her texts, the timeline of her manipulations, and corroborating accounts from Emma and Claire. I explained how these details aligned with the recording, painting a comprehensive picture of a carefully orchestrated campaign to interfere with our relationship. Everyone in the room could see the pattern, the intent, and the scope of her actions. Samantha's usual defenses, denial, projection, charm, were ineffective in the face of undeniable proof. For the first time, Samantha was forced to confront the full weight of her actions. She tried to deflect, claiming she had only been concerned, or that she didn't realize the impact of her words, but the evidence spoke louder than her excuses. She stumbled over her words, her face flushing red as the truth dismantled her carefully maintained facade. Every lie she had spun unraveled, leaving her exposed, her credibility shattered. Michael stood, voice steady but firm, addressing not just Samantha, but everyone present. "I've now seen the full picture. I understand what has been happening, and I can't allow someone's interference to dictate my trust or my relationship. Rachel's honesty, patience, and courage have brought this to light, and I'm grateful for it. The deception ends here." Samantha's shoulders slumped slightly, the fight draining out of her as she realized that the truth had won. No amount of charm, threats, or manipulation could restore her control. The evidence was too complete, the witnesses too clear. It was a public reckoning, and she had no choice but to retreat into the consequences of her actions. I felt a wave of relief and triumph over me. The recording, the documentation, the preparation, all of it had culminated in this moment. The final push wasn't about vengeance. It was about clarity, justice, and integrity. Michael and I had confronted the obstacle threatening our relationship not through anger or manipulation, but through patience, evidence, and integrity. The aftermath of the confrontation was immediate and profound. Samantha left shortly after, silence heavy between her and the group, and the tension that had been looming for months dissipated like fog under the morning sun. Michael and I sat together, hands intertwined, both of us breathing deeply, absorbing the significance of what had just occurred. We had weathered a storm that had threatened to tear us apart, and we had emerged stronger, united, and unshakable in our trust for one another. By the end of the night, even our parents and family friends expressed their support and acknowledgement. It was a moment of validation, not only for the evidence we had presented, but for the patience, courage, and unwavering belief that truth would ultimately prevail. The confrontation had transformed the dynamic. Samantha's manipulations no longer had power, and the integrity of our relationship had been restored in full view of everyone who mattered.
That night, as Michael and I finally sat alone, exhausted but triumphant, I realized something profound. Truth, once brought into the light, has an unstoppable force. The evidence, the courage to confront, and the willingness to stand firm in the face of deception had created a shift that could not be reversed. We had achieved the final push, the climax where lies and manipulations collided with honesty and resolve, and the outcome had been clear. Justice had been served, boundaries firmly established, and the path forward now stretched unbroken before us. The days following the climactic confrontation with Samantha were filled with a sense of calm that I hadn't felt in months. It was as if a heavy fog had lifted from my life, revealing a landscape where honesty, trust, and clarity finally reigned. Michael and I moved forward with a renewed sense of purpose, our bond strengthened not just by love, but by the trials we had endured together. There were no lingering doubts, no hidden manipulations to navigate, only the quiet reassurance that truth had restored equilibrium to our lives. We began by reinforcing our boundaries,
It wasn't enough to simply confront Samantha once. We needed to ensure that her influence would no longer have any sway over our decisions, our conversations, or our sense of self. Michael and I agreed on clear limits for family interactions, deciding which situations required our joint presence and which were off limits to avoid unnecessary friction. It was a delicate balancing act, but it allowed us to interact with the family without fear that Samantha's subtle manipulations could destabilize our relationship again. Our families gradually adjusted to the new dynamic. My parents, initially caught in the middle of the conflict, began to recognize the depth of Samantha's interference and the courage it took for me to confront her. Conversations became more straightforward, honest, and respectful. Friends who had observed the tension now approached us with congratulations, not just for standing up to Samantha, but for navigating the ordeal with integrity and composure. Even those relatives who had initially been skeptical of the situation eventually acknowledged the irrefutable evidence and the transparency we had maintained. For Michael and me, life began to feel lighter. We spent time together without the constant shadow of doubt or the fear of a third party undermining our trust. Our communication deepened, becoming more open and unguarded, and our relationship grew stronger than it had ever been before. I found myself laughing more freely, planning the future with confidence, and reclaiming the joy that Samantha's interference had temporarily stolen. The freedom to fully express love and trust without hesitation was exhilarating, almost surreal. At the same time, I recognized the personal growth that had come from the ordeal. Standing up to Samantha, gathering evidence, and presenting the truth had forced me to confront my fears, assert my voice, and trust my instincts. I realized that I had underestimated my own strength, that resilience and courage were not abstract qualities, but practical tools I could wield in moments of challenge. The experience had taught me the value of preparation, patience, and unwavering adherence to the truth, even when the consequences were uncertain. Samantha's presence gradually diminished in our lives. She became less involved in family events, retreating to her own sphere, and leaving us with the autonomy we had fought so hard to reclaim. While she remained a part of our extended family, her power over Michael and me was effectively neutralized. The recording, the messages, and the documented timeline were enough to hold her accountable, not in a punitive sense, but as a permanent reminder that her interference could no longer go unchecked. Beyond the immediate resolution, the ordeal fostered a profound sense of solidarity between Michael and me. We had weathered deception, manipulation, and emotional strain and emerged with our commitment to each other stronger than ever before. The experience became a shared story of perseverance, a testament to the strength of trust, evidence-based clarity, and the courage to confront injustice directly. It was a foundation upon which we could build the future, unshakable and resolute. I also took steps to support others who might encounter similar situations. By sharing my experience with close friends, emphasizing the importance of documentation, evidence, and strategic confrontation, I realized that the lessons I had learned could help others avoid prolonged suffering or manipulation. The ordeal had been painful, but its resolution gave me a sense of purpose beyond my immediate relationship. It became a story of empowerment, demonstrating that even when someone attempts to poison your life or relationships, courage and truth can prevail. In quieter moments, I reflected on how much had changed. The lingering anxiety that had followed Samantha's manipulations was gone. The tension that had weighed on my interactions with family members had eased. Most importantly, Michael and I had regained a sense of normalcy that was deeply satisfying, a rhythm of life unburdened by secrecy, lies, or suspicion. Even the simplest activities, dinner together, weekend outings, shared conversations, felt profoundly restorative. Reminders that the stability we had fought for was now ours to maintain. By the end of the month, the emotional landscape had shifted entirely. Samantha's attempts at interference were no longer part of our daily reality. Michael and I moved through our lives with confidence, laughter, and security, knowing that we had faced the storm and emerged intact. The equilibrium we had fought to reclaim was not just about restoring a relationship, it was about reclaiming agency, asserting boundaries, and proving to ourselves that the truth, when confronted decisively and courageously, could triumph over manipulation and deceit.
As I lay in bed one evening, reflecting on the journey, I understood that the resolution wasn't a single moment, but a cumulative process, gathering evidence, confronting deception, enduring emotional trials, and finally, re-establishing balance. The new equilibrium wasn't simply the absence of conflict, it was the presence of empowerment, clarity, and mutual respect, a state of being that would guide Michael and me forward for years to come. The weeks after the confrontation brought a sense of serenity that felt almost surreal. Michael and I were no longer shadowed by Samantha's manipulations or the fear that her jealousy could infiltrate our relationship. The recording, the texts, and the carefully documented timeline had not only held her accountable, but had given us a foundation of trust and transparency that neither of us had dared to hope for before. Life began to settle into a rhythm that was simple yet profoundly fulfilling. And I finally understood what it meant to emerge from conflict, stronger, wiser, and fully empowered. We started investing more intentionally in our future. Michael and I talked openly about our long-term plans, everything from moving into a new apartment to pursuing joint ventures in our careers. Where once there had been hesitancy, insecurity, and doubt, there was now clarity and shared purpose. Every conversation was free from the anxiety that Samantha's interference had instilled, and I felt the lightness of being able to love and plan without having to constantly justify myself. Our relationship was no longer just surviving, it was thriving, resilient in a way that only hardship can make it. I also noticed subtle changes in my own behavior. For years, I had internalized Samantha's manipulations, questioning my instincts, second-guessing my decisions, and shrinking in situations where I should have asserted myself. But confronting her, standing my ground, and validating the truth had a transformative effect. I was more confident in my interactions, more assertive in expressing my needs, and more vigilant in protecting my emotional well-being. This transformation extended beyond my relationship. I approached work, friendships, and family dynamics with a new sense of clarity and self-assurance. The lessons of resilience and strategic confrontation had become tools I could carry into every aspect of life. Family gatherings, once tense and fraught with subtle manipulations, now felt lighter and more genuine. Samantha's presence was diminished, her attempts to dominate conversations and redirect attention ineffective. The atmosphere was no longer clouded with suspicion or unspoken power struggles. My parents and extended family gradually adjusted, acknowledging that while Samantha remained a part of the family, her influence over Michael and me had been decisively curtailed. What had once been a minefield of tension and doubt became a space where authenticity and mutual respect could flourish. Michael and I found joy in the simplest of moments, those small, unremarkable slices of life that are often overlooked but hold immense meaning. Cooking dinner together on a quiet night, laughing over inside jokes, and planning weekend outings without the constant undercurrent of anxiety. Every shared moment reinforced the foundation of trust and respect that had been rebuilt through confrontation and truth. I realized that while the conflict had been painful, it had also strengthened our bond, turning us into a team capable of facing challenges with confidence and unity. Beyond our immediate relationship, I became more attuned to supporting others who might encounter similar situations. I shared my experience with friends, emphasizing the importance of evidence, courage, and timing in confronting manipulative behavior. The ordeal had provided me with practical wisdom. Deception thrives in silence, and even the most calculated manipulations can be neutralized when the truth is approached methodically and assertively. Empowering others to recognize and respond to manipulation became a personal mission, a way to transform the pain I had endured into a source of guidance and strength for others. Even Samantha, though still present in our extended family's life, no longer wielded the control she once had. She was relegated to a peripheral role, her attempts to influence watched carefully and thwarted by the very evidence that had previously exposed her. I no longer feared her. I understood her limitations, her motives, and the fact that her power was rooted entirely in deception.
That knowledge gave me a profound sense of security, not just in my relationship with Michael, but in my ability to navigate any future challenges with confidence and discernment. Looking back, I could see the full arc of transformation. What began as manipulation, doubt, and emotional turmoil had evolved into empowerment, clarity, and unwavering trust. Michael and I had endured a trial that tested the very foundations of our relationship, and we emerged not only intact, but strengthened. The recording, the documentation, and the courage to confront deception had served as catalysts for growth, allowing us to reclaim our lives, our love, and our sense of self. In the final moments of reflection, I understood that this story was about more than defeating manipulation. It was about transformation. I had moved from uncertainty and self-doubt to clarity and confidence, from fear to empowerment, from silence to assertive action. Michael had transitioned from confusion and doubt to understanding and steadfast support. Together, we had created a new life, free from interference, grounded in trust, and guided by the lessons we had learned through adversity.
As I stood by the window one evening, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars, I felt a profound sense of peace. The storm had passed. The manipulations that had threatened to unravel our lives had been confronted, exposed, and neutralized. Michael held my hand, a quiet symbol of the resilience we had built together. And I knew, without hesitation, that this was more than a resolution. It was a new beginning. The experience had shaped me, strengthened me, and given me purpose to live courageously, to speak the truth, and to protect the life I had fought so hard to reclaim. In that moment, the transformation was complete. And for the first time in a long time, I felt fully, unshakably whole. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.